Usually when we talk about being a good person, society provides a very specific checklist for you.
Oh, absolutely. A very rigid checklist.
Right. It's like you pay your taxes on time, you hold the door for the person carrying groceries behind you. Maybe you drop a few dollars into the charity bucket during the holidays.
Yeah, and then the culture around you just points and says, there it is, a good person.
Yeah, it is treated as this highly observable, quantifiable state of being. You perform the required actions and you earn the title.
Because we crave measurement. I mean, we really do. We want morality to be a visible binary ledger of selfish actions versus unselfish actions.
It's easier that way.
Totally. It offers a sense of control and predictability to assume that if we just follow the accepted societal rules, our moral standing is totally secure. We judge the surface because, well, the surface is really easy to tabulate.
But that checklist breaks down entirely when you step into the world of historical philosophy, especially when looking at the actual motives operating underneath those actions.
Yeah, that's where it gets messy.
Really messy. So we are jumping straight into an excerpt from a philosophical treatise by Jonathan Edwards called The Nature of True Virtue. And for those listening to Reformed Thinking, our goal today is to parse his logic. We want to strip away modern superficial definitions of niceness.
Which is a huge task.
It is. We're trying to uncover the absolute root of moral beauty here. Edwards attempts to lock down the precise essence of what makes a person's heart or their actions genuinely good.
Independent of what society might applaud.
Yes, completely independent of that. And this deep dive is, honestly, it's a mental workout. But the intellectual rewards for you, the listener, are massive if you stick with it.
It really forces a total perspective shift. Edwards approaches this not by looking at the actions themselves, but by looking at the engine driving those actions.
Their motives.
Right. He forces the reader to confront the reality that you can perform every single action on that societal checklist and still possess a heart that is entirely devoid of true virtue.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is. And he begins this argument by making a very specific categorization. He states that virtue is a kind of beauty.
Okay, but he means a very specific kind, right?
Yeah, he immediately draws strict lines around what kind of beauty he means. He separates moral virtue from two other types of beauty that human beings constantly confuse it with.
Which are?
Physical beauty and intellectual beauty.
So physical beauty is obvious. I mean, a flower, a pristine mountain range, a spectacular piece of architecture.
Right, visual things.
Yeah, those things possess an aesthetic draw. We call them beautiful. But no one assumes a mountain has moral virtue.
No, of course not.
Because it's an inanimate object, it lacks consciousness, it lacks a will.
Yeah, the confusion rarely happens with physical objects. No one's waiting for a rock to apologize. The real danger arises with this second category.
Intellectual beauty.
Yes. Edwards acknowledges there is a genuine beauty in the ideas, theories, and conceptions of brilliant minds.
Like a math problem.
Well, I mean, yes. We look at a spectacular mathematical theorem or a brilliant piece of diplomatic strategy, and we recognize an elegance in it. We might call a philosopher's argument beautiful.
But Edwards insists that intellectual brilliance is completely distinct from moral virtue.
Totally distinct. True virtue is a beauty that has its original seat in the mind, but it specifically belongs to beings capable of perception and will.
So it belongs to the disposition.
Yes, the heart.
That distinction right there hits on a massive flaw in how modern culture operates. I mean, we constantly conflate intellectual sharpness with moral goodness.
All the time.
We assume because someone is highly articulate or holds multiple advanced degrees or, I don't know, innovates a brilliant piece of technology that they possess a virtuous character.
We elevate people to massive platforms of influence based on their intellectual beauty, assuming their high intelligence just guarantees a good disposition.
And we see the fallout from that assumption constantly.
Yeah, we really do. A person can possess an astounding capacity for complex thought, memory, spatial reasoning, and they can use all of those faculties to orchestrate immense harm.
Because intelligence is just a tool.
Right. It's a capacity of the mind. It is entirely neutral. Edwards locates virtue exclusively in the heart, the will, the disposition, the actual choices made by the intelligent being.
He points out that for a quality to be of a moral nature, it must be attended with desert, meaning it must be worthy of praise or blame.
Yes. And you cannot praise or blame a calculator for producing the correct answer.
Right. The calculator is simply functioning according to its design. It has no will. It makes no moral choice.
And you cannot blame a hurricane for flattening a city either.
Because the hurricane possesses immense force, but it lacks a disposition.
Spot on. Praise and blame are reserved for beings that perceive a situation and actively will a specific outcome. Therefore, virtue is the beauty of the qualities and exercises of the heart.
It's the alignment of the will, not the capacity of the brain.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Think about it like this. Imagine a computer hacker writing a devastating piece of ransomware.
Okay.
From an engineering standpoint, another programmer might look at that code and recognize it as, flawless, elegant, highly efficient.
Right, that is intellectual beauty. The structure of the code is brilliant.
But that code is designed to shut down a hospital's critical systems until a massive financial payout is secured. So the code lacks moral beauty entirely.
Entirely.
The intellect behind the action is stunning, but the disposition, the will of the hacker, is completely misaligned. The heart behind the brilliance is just ugly.
And honestly, the brilliance actually magnifies the ugliness of the disposition.
Oh, how so?
Well, the sharper the intellect, the more damage a misaligned will can cause.
Hmm?
The ransomware works better because the guy is smart.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
Edwards warns his readers not to be seduced by a sharp mind. He forces us to ask a much harder question. If we have established that virtue is located in the disposition of the heart, what differentiates a truly beautiful heart from one that only appears beautiful?
Because we can still be fooled by actions that look virtuous on the surface.
Right. And Edwards introduces a concept here to answer that. He separates what he calls particular beauty from general beauty.
Okay, particular versus general.
Yeah. He defines particular beauty as something that appears beautiful when considered only within a limited, private sphere.
Meaning?
It's a beauty that exists when you look at it in isolation or in relation to a very small, restricted set of circumstances.
Oh, I see.
And he contrasts that with general beauty, which is the quality by which a thing appears beautiful when viewed comprehensively.
So, looking at the big picture.
Right. General beauty requires looking at an action universally, with regard to all its tendencies and its connections with the entire system of existence.
So an action might seem entirely good when viewed in a vacuum, right?
Hmm.
But it becomes a source of immense discord when you zoom out and observe its universal connections.
Yes. True virtue requires alignment with the universal system.
He uses an analogy about music to illustrate this, doesn't he?
He does, and it's brilliant. If you take a few notes in a tune and play them by themselves, they might sound harmonious.
Within their tiny, isolated context, they possess particular beauty.
Right. But if you take those exact same notes and insert them into the larger symphony, they might clash horribly with the rest of the instruments.
They become discordant and grating. They literally ruin the broader piece of music.
And human actions and human loyalties operate under that exact same principle. We can act in a way that creates harmony in a very small, private circle.
Like being incredibly generous to our immediate family.
Yeah, or fiercely protective of our specific social group. Within that contracted view, our actions appear virtuous.
But if that same loyalty creates chaos, pain, or injustice in the broader society, it is not true virtue.
No, it's a private harmony that creates a universal discord.
Let me push this into a more uncomfortable real-world scenario. Let's apply this to the concept of a mafia family.
Oh, that's a good one.
In that setting, the trap of particular beauty becomes glaringly obvious. Within the private sphere of the organization, you find intense loyalty.
Very intense.
Members provide for each other, they protect each other's children, and they adhere to a strict internal code of honor.
And if you only study the relationships within that small group, it looks like virtue.
Yeah, it really does. But when you look at how that private circle interacts with the broader city, extracting wealth through extortion, silencing opponents through violence, corrupting local institutions, the illusion completely shatters.
The notes of their internal loyalties sound good together, but they destroy the symphony of the society they inhabit.
Right. The intense loyalty of the group is actually the engine driving the broader destruction.
The stronger their particular beauty, the worse the general discord becomes. And Edwards argues that human beings are highly susceptible to this trap.
We really are.
We are naturally wired to appreciate the limited sphere because it is tangible, immediate, and visible. My family, my friends, my town.
It takes a massive effort of the will and the intellect to step back and consider the universality of our actions.
Which is why we see this driving modern tribalism and nationalism so hard. People develop an intense loyalty to their specific faction, their specific nation, or their political ideology.
And they convince themselves they are acting virtuously because they're defending their own group.
Yeah, they view their fierce protection of their small circle as a moral high ground.
Yet that localized loyalty often requires demonizing anyone outside the circle. They are just playing their isolated notes louder and louder, completely ignoring the grating noise it creates against the rest of human existence.
That's a great way to put it. Edwards states that a private circle of affection that does not imply a tendency to a union with the great system is not true virtue. It falls completely short of the mark.
So if a disposition is truly beautiful, it must be beautiful by a general beauty. It must harmonize with the entirety of existence.
Which leads to the central question of his entire treatise.
Right. If true virtue must harmonize with the universal system, what is the precise object of this virtue? What is the actual target of a truly beautiful heart?
Edwards defines this super clearly. He states that true virtue most essentially consists in benevolence to being in general.
Benevolence to being in general.
Yes, he describes it as a consent, a propensity, and a union of heart to universal existence.
Okay, let's translate being in general because he is not suggesting we must harbor intense affection for inanimate objects like rocks or dirt.
No, no. He clarifies that being, in this context, refers to intelligent beings capable of perception and will.
Okay, so conscious existence.
Right. He is addressing the totality of conscious existence.
You're right.
Benevolence is an active, expansive goodwill toward that totality.
So it's a disposition that genuinely desires the well-being and the flourishing of the entire system, rather than seeking the advantage of a single, isolated part.
Yeah. And the psychological shift required to operate this way is staggering.
I mean, we are conditioned from birth to view ourselves as isolated individuals, right? Like the center of our own narrative.
Oh, completely. Our default setting is to prioritize our own needs, then the needs of our immediate family, and maybe the needs of our local community.
But Edwards is asking the reader to view themselves as a single, infinitesimal thread within a massive, interconnected reality.
Yes. When your disposition is bent toward being in general, your decision-making process flips entirely. You no longer ask what benefits you in the short term.
You ask how your actions resonate through the overarching structure of reality. You seek to consent with the whole.
That concept of consent is so vital here. It means your will agrees with the flourishing of universal existence.
You are not fighting against the whole to secure a private advantage. You are willingly participating in the broader harmony.
Think about a single cell operating inside a human body.
Okay, biology analogy, I like it.
If that cell decides to work only for its private proliferation, like gathering resources exclusively for itself, ignoring the communication signals from the surrounding tissue, reproducing without limit,
then it exhibits particular beauty. It is thriving locally. It is highly successful at being a single cell.
But in biology, a cell that operates with complete disregard for the general system is a cancer.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It grows, it establishes its own private empire, but it eventually destroys the host and consequently destroys itself.
The analogy holds up under intense scrutiny. The cancer cell has no union of heart with the body.
None. Conversely, a healthy cell works in consent and agreement with the whole.
It performs its specific function. It uses only the resources it needs.
It communicates with the surrounding tissue, and it even undergoes apoptosis-programmed cell death when its continued existence would harm the broader system.
That's incredible. It exhibits true biological harmony because its disposition is aligned with the general body.
And Edwards forces us to ask if we are operating as healthy cells or as cancer within the universal system.
But to achieve this alignment, the type of love we exercise becomes the deciding factor, right?
Yeah. The word love is universally recognized, but its application varies wildly.
It really does.
Edwards outlines the mechanics of this love with intense precision. He draws a firm line between what he calls the love of benevolence and the love of complacence.
Okay, benevolence versus complacence.
This distinction is arguably the most critical mechanism in his entire argument.
Let's break those down.
He defines the love of benevolence as an affection or propensity of the heart to any being that causes it to incline to its well-being.
So it's the disposition to desire and take pleasure in the happiness of another.
Right. And the defining characteristic of benevolence is that the object of this love does not need to possess any prior beauty or excellence.
Meaning you desire their good regardless of their current state, their merit, or their attractiveness.
Yes. While complacence operates on a completely different engine.
How so?
The love of complacence presupposes beauty. It is a delight in an object because of its existing excellence.
So you love the thing because it is already pleasing, virtuous, or aesthetically beautiful.
Exactly. I mean, yes, the love is a reaction to a quality the object already possesses.
Let's ground this with an analogy for the listener. Think about the love of benevolence, like taking in a stray dog.
Oh, yeah.
The dog is mangy, aggressive, sick, and covered in mud.
It has no aesthetic appeal whatsoever.
Right. It snaps at your hand. It offers you zero comfort, but you take it in, you pay for the medical treatment, you provide food and shelter simply because you desire its well-being.
You seek its healing without requiring it to offer you any beauty in return.
The affection initiates from you, not from the dog.
While the love of complacence is entirely reactive.
Right. Complacence is going to an elite breeder and purchasing a purebred show dog.
The dog has a pristine coat, perfect obedience training, and ideal temperament.
And you admire it, you delight in it, and you love it because it is already beautiful. Both scenarios involve affection, but the starting point dictates the entire nature of the relationship.
Yes. And Edwards uses this distinction to address a staggering theological reality regarding the nature of the divine.
Okay, where does he go with this?
He points out that God's benevolence must precede the existence and the beauty of all created things.
Oh, because before creation, nothing was there.
Right. If the Creator only exercised the love of complacence, he would only love things that were already beautiful. But before the act of creation out of nothing, nothing existed.
There was no beauty to observe, no excellence to delight in, and no creature to admire.
Exactly. Therefore, God's goodness moved him to grant both being and beauty to the universe.
So his benevolence is the uncaused foundation.
Yes. He creates specifically to give existence and happiness entirely unprompted by any external beauty.
When you apply that distinction to human relationships, it exposes why so many of our social structures crumble.
Oh, it's brutal when you look at it.
We build our friendships, our marriages, and our alliances almost exclusively on the love of complacence.
We really do. We look at other people and we require them to be beautiful first.
We demand they have their lives sorted out, that they are intellectually stimulating, morally upright, perfectly aligned with our opinions.
We want to delight in the qualities they already possess.
Yeah.
We approach relationships as consumers looking for a finished product.
And when the product degrades, when the beauty fades, when the person makes a moral error, or when the intellectual stimulation wanes, the love of complacence just vanishes.
It vanishes because the foundation of the affection was the existing beauty of the object. When the object ceases to be beautiful, the love has absolutely nothing left to stand on, it collapses.
But if a society operated from a primary disposition of benevolence, the dynamic would be entirely inverted.
Yes, we would desire the good of others regardless of their current state.
We would seek their flourishing even when they are not displaying any moral or physical beauty.
Benevolence is a far more resilient, durable framework because it does not depend on the perfection of the recipient.
And Edwards does not make this distinction merely as practical relationship advice, right?
No, not at all. He uses it as a scalpel to dissect and remove a massive philosophical error regarding the origin of morality itself.
This is fascinating.
He applies this understanding of complacence to dismantle a circular logic trap that has snared countless ethical systems.
This is where the logic requires intense focus, but the payoff is staggering. The trap is the idea that the foundation of goodness is loving good things.
Yes. Edwards argues that it is an absolute inconsistency to claim that virtue primarily consists in loving an object for its beauty.
He mathematically proves that the primary root of true virtue cannot be the love of complacence.
Right.
Let's walk through his reasoning step by step, because it's a lot to wrap your head around. Why does the love of complacence fail as the starting point for morality?
We have to follow the chain of definitions he has already established. He defined virtue as the moral beauty of the mind.
Okay, so virtue and moral beauty are synonymous.
Yes. So if a philosophical system claims that virtue primarily consists in loving beauty, they are effectively claiming that virtue consists in loving virtue.
Okay, wait. That sounds plausible on the surface. We tell people all the time, goodness means loving good people and good actions.
It sounds totally fine until you apply pressure to it.
Right, because if the definition of a word requires the use of the word itself, you have not defined anything. You have created a loop.
It is the classic in infinitum argument,
Yeah.
an infinite regress.
Okay, let me try to map this out. If the first virtue is loving virtue, then virtue becomes the consequence of itself,
The cause and the effect are identical.
which forces you to ask, what was the first virtue that was being loved?
Yes, because if virtue consists primarily in love to virtue, then the object you are loving is the love of virtue.
Oh, my head hurts. So that means virtue consists in the love of virtue.
And the chain goes backward forever, hanging in empty space, never anchoring to a solid foundation.
It is like walking into a room entirely lined with mirrors.
Oh, I love that analogy.
You see an infinite repetition of reflections, but when you look for the original object casting the reflection, there is nothing there.
The mirrors are just reflecting other mirrors.
A moral framework built on the love of complacence is exactly that room. You keep peeling back the layers to find the origin of the goodness, and there is nothing at the center.
Therefore, the primary initiating root of virtue must be something fundamentally different from delighting in existing beauty.
The bedrock cannot be the love of complacence, because complacence requires beauty to already exist before it can act.
There must be a primary movement of the heart that does not rely on observing something that is already virtuous.
Because you cannot build a bridge by starting the construction in the middle of the air. You need a pillar anchored into bedrock.
And delighting in existing beauty is mid-air construction. You still have to explain where the very first beautiful thing came from.
Okay, so having successfully eliminated the love of existing beauty as the foundation, Edwards applies the exact same logical rigor to eliminate another highly popular candidate for the origin of virtue.
Yes, he targets the concept of gratitude.
This argument strikes at the core of a lot of modern sensibilities.
It really does. We elevate gratitude constantly in our culture.
We really do. We treat it as the absolute peak of moral achievement. We encourage gratitude journals. We build campaigns around recognizing the good things others have done.
We judge people harshly when they fail to show appreciation.
And then Edwards comes along and states that gratitude cannot possibly be the primary root of true virtue.
Right. And he defines gratitude specifically as one being's benevolence to another because of their prior benevolence to him.
So it is a reactionary affection.
Yes, someone performs a kind action for me, and my heart responds by desiring their well-being in return.
The logic he uses to discard gratitude as the primary root is identical to the logic he used for complacence, right?
Spot on. Gratitude, by its very definition, requires a prior act. It mathematically relies on a preceding trigger. Therefore, it is a reactive virtue.
If my moral goodness is strictly defined by my ability to say thank you for your goodness, we are back in the infinite loop.
Who initiated the chain?
Right. The very first act of benevolence in the universe could not possibly be an act of gratitude, because prior to that first act, there was nothing to be grateful for. No one had done anything.
The system demands an uncaused, primary, absolute benevolence. Gratitude is a beautiful response, but it is a response.
True virtue, in its most primary and pure essence, cannot require a trigger. It must initiate.
It forces the reader to look higher, toward a love that exists completely independently of how others behave or what they offer.
And realizing that gratitude is a reactive virtue really challenges us to analyze our own daily motives.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, am I operating from a place of true virtue, or am I just running a transactional ledger?
Am I only kind to the neighbors who are kind to me?
Right. Am I only generous to the systems that offer me a return on investment? If my moral output is entirely dependent on the moral input I receive from my environment, I am not generating virtue.
You're just a mirror reflecting the room you are standing in.
That's a gut punch. It is a transactional morality. It is safe and it is manageable, but it is not the bedrock of moral beauty.
No, it's not. Edwards is pushing for a framework that initiates goodness into the void, rather than just returning goodness that was already provided.
Okay, so we have cleared the brush. The love of complacence is removed.
Gratitude is removed as the primary foundation.
The infinite regress is solved. We are left with only one logical starting point for true virtue.
The bedrock is absolute benevolence.
And the primary object of virtuous love is being simply considered.
Yes. It is a propensity and union of heart to universal existence, which excites an absolute benevolence to being in general.
The first object of a virtuous heart is seeking the highest good of universal existence.
But, and this is key, Edwards introduces a highly specific metric to this benevolence. He introduces a calculus of existence.
A calculus of existence.
Okay, he states that love should be proportionate. The object with the greatest share of existence, assuming all other things are equal, demands the greatest share of benevolent affection.
Wait, we must parse his phrasing carefully to avoid a massive misunderstanding here.
Good call.
When he speaks of the greatest share of existence, he is not referring to, like, physical volume or spatial mass.
Right, he is not suggesting that a larger physical object deserves more affection than a smaller one.
Because he established earlier that being in this context refers to intelligent entities capable of perception and will.
Exactly, yeah, that's right. The share of existence refers to the capacity, the moral weight, and the magnitude of the intelligent entity.
So if a heart genuinely seeks the highest good of universal existence, it will naturally allocate its benevolent affection in proportion to the degree of existence held by the object.
Right. But when people hear this, the immediate reaction is resistance.
Yeah, because it sounds like a cold, calculated utilitarianism.
It does.
Are we supposed to walk through our lives weighing the capacity for being of every person we meet, allocating our affection like a corporate budget? It sounds devoid of any genuine warmth.
It sounds cold if you attempt to apply it horizontally, purely among human interactions. But this framework is pointing vertically. It's pointing directly toward the divine.
Oh, I see.
In Edwards' worldview, God possesses the infinite majority of being and existence. God is the uncreated source, the sustainer of all reality, the infinite mind.
Therefore, any true benevolence that seeks the good of universal existence must inherently prioritize the creator over the creature.
Because the Creator holds the greatest share of existence by an infinite, unbridgeable margin.
So the math solves the ultimate priority of the universe.
Yes, it is not about deciding whether to allocate 51% of your love to your neighbor and 49% to your coworker.
If you love being in general, your greatest affection, your primary loyalty, will naturally flow to the being that comprehends all things and sustains all things.
And Edwards also points out the severe consequence of this calculus. If you are genuinely seeking the highest good of being in general, you will naturally give up the good of a smaller, particular being if its existence conflicts with the whole.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, you will actively oppose declared enemies of being in general.
So if an entity is irreclaimably opposed to the universal good, a truly virtuous heart will forsake that enemy.
Which aligns perfectly with the earlier discussion regarding the trap of particular beauty.
You forsake the destructive cancer cell for the sake of preserving the entire body.
Yes, you oppose the discordant noise for the sake of the symphony. True virtue is not a passive, weak tolerance of everything. It requires active opposition to anything that seeks to destroy the universal harmony.
But there is a secondary level to this love that Edwards introduces to complete the framework, isn't there?
Yes, there is. We have established that the primary object is being in general, with affection proportioned to the share of existence.
And the primary disposition is absolute benevolence.
But what happens when a person operating with this disposition encounters another person operating the exact same way?
This brings us to what Edwards calls the secondary object of virtue.
Right. The secondary ground of pure benevolence is loving a person specifically because they possess general benevolence.
So when you witness someone who loves being in general, your heart naturally attaches to them.
Yes. Edwards notes that spiritual beauty consists wholly in this secondary ground.
Why does this reaction happen so automatically? Why are we so drawn to universally benevolent people?
Edwards explains that when a person possesses a benevolent disposition toward universal existence, their own being is, as it were, enlarged.
Enlarged.
Yeah, their heart extends to comprehend being in general. They no longer view themselves as an isolated point. They look on the universal interest as their own interest.
They have expanded their identity to embrace the whole.
And if you are someone who is also governed by a love to being in general, you must of necessity have complacence in this person.
Remember, complacence is delighting in existing beauty.
Right? You look at their benevolent propensity, you recognize it as a supreme excellency, and you delight in it.
You love them out of gratitude for their love to universal existence because your own heart is deeply united to that exact same existence.
It is a shared spirit of consent.
Edwards uses an analogy about gold to clarify why we value this combined benevolence so highly, doesn't he?
He does. He notes that if you see benevolence in two beings, you value it more than in one. It is a greater thing to have two beings favor the general good than just a single isolated individual.
There is more being that favors being.
Just as a large quantity of gold is inherently more valuable than a small quantity of the exact same quality metal, More being that favors the universal good is a greater overall good.
The total amount of general goodwill in the universe has multiplied.
And that increase is a cause for intense, immediate delight for anyone who values the universal system.
Think about the real-world experience of recognizing a kindred spirit.
Oh man, that feeling is incredible.
It is. A person who genuinely seeks the good of the world can travel to a different country, meet someone from an entirely different culture, speaking a different language, and feel an instant, profound connection.
Because when you witness someone acting out of pure benevolence, seeking the harmony of the whole rather than their private selfish gain, you feel an immediate bond.
You bypass all the superficial cultural differences because you recognize they speak the exact same language of universal consent. You are both pulling in the same direction.
That is the secondary ground of virtuous love operating in real time. It is the spiritual beauty that naturally arises from the primary foundation.
You love the whole, and therefore you cannot help but love anyone else who actively loves the whole.
But there is a final, incredibly sobering point Edwards makes regarding this secondary beauty.
Oh, right.
He states that it is impossible for anyone to truly relish this beauty in others unless they possess that benevolent temper themselves.
A selfish heart, a heart trapped in particular beauty, literally cannot value a universally generous heart.
The mechanics of that failure are easy to trace. If a being is entirely destitute of benevolence, if their entire existence is dedicated to their private circle and their personal advancement, why would they prize someone else's dedication to the general good?
They wouldn't, because they do not value the general good themselves. If I care absolutely nothing about the symphony, I am not going to appreciate the musician who works tirelessly day and night to keep the orchestra in tune.
No, you won't recognize their effort as beautiful at all.
In fact, I might resent them for making me look bad, or for asking me to care about something I find totally useless.
Edwards states the contradiction plainly. For a selfish person to love general benevolence, they would have to prize and seek that for which they had absolutely no value.
Which is an impossibility.
You cannot value a disposition that promotes a thing when you are completely regardless of the thing itself.
This perfectly explains the heavy cynicism we see permeating so much of the modern world.
It really does.
When a genuinely virtuous act occurs, an act of pure benevolence with no obvious hidden agenda, no financial kickoff, and no PR advantage, cynical people immediately try to find the selfish angle.
They assume it is a manipulation tactic. They assume the person is angling for leverage.
They literally lack the internal capacity to relish the spiritual beauty of the act because their own disposition lacks the temper that makes the act beautiful.
They only understand the language of particular beauty and private interest, so they project that motive onto everyone else.
It is a stark dividing line. A person's ability to recognize, appreciate, and delight in true virtue is entirely dependent on whether their own heart has consented to being in general.
So true.
Synthesizing this massive philosophical framework alters how we view every interaction. I mean, we started by looking at the common societal checklist version of morality.
The assumption that external niceness equals goodness.
We moved from viewing virtue as localized niceness or particular beauty to understanding it as a cosmic alignment with universal existence.
We established that true moral beauty resides exclusively in the disposition of the heart, not in the intellect or in physical aesthetics.
And we observed that this disposition must be directed toward the highest good of all intelligent beings.
We dismantled the circular logic trap, proving that the foundation of goodness cannot be the love of complacence, nor can it be gratitude.
We uncovered that true virtue must be rooted in an absolute benevolence, a desire for universal well-being that requires no prior trigger, demands no existing beauty, and expects no return.
And we saw how this primary benevolence naturally scales according to the share of existence, prioritizing the infinite over the finite, while creating a secondary beauty when we recognize that same universal love in other people.
This text asks the reader to step completely outside their narrow private spheres. It challenges human tribalism, it exposes transactional relationships, and it demands an active union of heart with the overarching system of reality.
It is a rigorous, highly demanding framework, but it provides a level of clarity that the murky waters of modern checklist morality simply cannot offer. It forces a complete reevaluation of motive.
I want to leave you with a final idea to process as you go about the rest of your week. If true virtue requires us to love the entirety of existence and to prioritize those with the greatest share of being, how should that alter the way you view your daily conflicts, your private loyalties, and your smallest acts of kindness? When you look at the choices in front of you, ask yourself, Are your actions harmonizing with the universal symphony, or are you just playing an isolated, discordant tune on your own? Thank you for joining Reformed Thinking for this deep dive into the underlying mechanics of moral beauty. Keep questioning the surface, keep seeking harmony, and we will catch you on the next one.